Hello everybody, welcome back. In this lecture, which is Part 2, Section 5, Topic 4, we're going to think about custom reports. And we're going to start off by asking what are custom reports, and then how we can define custom reports, and finally look at an example of a custom report. So, reports that are defined by the owner or the user of a piece of equipment, rather than by the device manufacturer, are custom reports. The reports defined by the manufacturer will cover basic information that anybody who's bought one of these devices might be interested in knowing. So, for instance, for an Ethernet switch manufacturer, they might have predefined reports that look at the amount of traffic going through each Ethernet port in the last few hours, the last few days, and that will be a standard built-in report. But for a particular user of a switch, they may be far less interested in the number of packets or number of bytes, but particularly interested in the number of messages of a particular protocol type, and so they want to break down by that particular protocol use. And that would be a custom report. So we say that custom reports allow a set of reports to be extended and tailored. The set that we're extending, of course, is the built-in set of reports, and we're tailoring them with new additional reports to present the information in a different way, to present different information according to what we as users of a particular device are using it for and how we'd like to use it in the future. So this is giving us some integration of a generic product that we might have just bought from a switch manufacturer. We're getting integration of that generic device with our current business service assurance needs. And as our company evolves, we can evolve the set of reports that we generate. And so this is giving us some protection of investment. That is, if a particular switch manufacturer allows me to define custom reports, then it's worth my buying their product rather than a competitor's product, a different Ethernet switch that doesn't allow custom reports. Because with the device that does allow custom reports, I can be sure that as my needs change, I will not need to buy a new switch. I will be able to tailor the switch I've already got, be able to add new reports, add new metrics, and so my investment in the switch will be protected by my ability to continue using it. So these custom reports are providing that sort of business advantage of one product over another. The custom reports themselves can produce an ASCII output or a graphical output, and this might be saved into a file, it might be printed, sent by email, saved onto a file server. Saved into the cloud is a common example these days. And it will show whatever relevant summarized statistics our particular customer wants. So in a way that fits that company's culture, its objectives, its current projects, what it makes sense to track for them for what they're doing at the moment. And these custom reports can save an enormous amount of staff time, because the time it would take to get the raw information from all of the switch ports or all of the switches in the network, to put all of that into a spreadsheet, to number crunch it to produce the metrics that we want, and then to draw a graph of those numbers and print that out, and to do this every day without making a mistake is really quite a time-consuming task. Of course, it also becomes dependent on the particular person that does this, and so if they are busy doing something else, or they're on holiday, or they're off sick, then we might miss one of these reports. And so it's much more advantageous if the system can produce the report, and then if one member of staff is off sick, it just takes another member of staff to request that the report be generated, and anybody could do that. Or, of course, better still, we can schedule the report to happen automatically, and we'll look at the ways of scheduling reports in another lecture. So these reports save staff time. They also allow staff to focus on the interpretation of the information in the report. They're not using up brain power in thinking about producing the report, combining the numbers correctly, doing the correct maths, the correct statistical analysis, thinking about whether these statistics are valid ways of using numbers. We just think about that once when we define the report. And then as the report runs every day, we know that the data it spits out is all good stuff. And we just need to consume that data and use it in whatever way we like. And over the lifetime of the equipment, the advantage of having one or many custom reports is going to correspond to a vast saving in staff time, in staff effort, and so overall business productivity. Now, some devices expose an API that provides their raw data, and then the actual custom report will run on a different computer that uses the API to extract the data. So let's think about an example. We might have an Ethernet switch that doesn't run the custom report itself, but exposes the data that one might need to run a custom report, exposes that data over an API. And then on one of our computers in the operations center, we run some software that actually generates the report, and it will connect over the network to the Ethernet switch to use the API calls to collect the data that it needs to be able to draw the graph. And we see the usual advantages of doing this in that we've got much more CPU time available on a big, powerful computer in the operations center compared to the small embedded processor of the Ethernet switch. And we've also got reference to large data sets. We can use, as the example on the slide suggests, ODBC to connect to other data stores, like a database of historical statistics. We can connect to many Ethernet switches, and so the report might be comparing what one switch is doing versus another, or plotting a single graph with separate lines for each of the switches, so we're fusing data together for presentation. The NMS is just using the APIs to access the data in these cases. So we've got the tools that are reading raw data, and then it's the tools that are doing the presentation and summarization. But this is only one way of doing it, and we'll find that some devices actually provide a built-in programming language, usually a scripting language, that allows us to write programs that access the switch's own internal data sets, usually it's live statistics and counters, and use that live information to produce a report, and they can save the report onto the switch's internal memory, and then the NMS would just download the produced report once it's ready. And in this way, we're still able to extend the switch's functionality and tailor it for our use, but it's now the switch that's running the report rather than the NMS. The switch will only take into account numbers, statistics from its own data. It won't be looking at what other switches in the network are doing, but it will likely have access to much finer grained information than is available to the NMS, simply because of the timescales involved. If we tried to report every network packet, for instance, from an Ethernet switch to the NMS, then every network packet that goes through the switch would trigger a flurry of other packets, and so we'd be escalating the amount of traffic in the network by 5, 6, 7 times. And that's generally not a feasible increase in the amount of traffic we have to cope with. So some devices provide these built-in scripting languages as the mechanism for extension. Now, of the two approaches, we may need the scripting language approach if we need the detailed statistics from deep within the device itself. But otherwise, the API approach is the better one. The API approach allows us to build a reporting engine on a different machine in the NMS and fuse data from several different devices together, giving us the bigger picture report, giving us more flexibility to generate clever reports that summarize lots of data. It allows the reporting engine to refer to these external databases and brings together some business intelligence. I've got an example of that on the slide here. We might plot graphs of the network traffic for each workstation and show the times of day when the employee that uses that workstation clocked in to work and when they clocked out of the office in the evening. And we might raise an alarm if there is significant activity before the user arrived or after the user had left, because this indicates some activity on their workstation that is unexpected, given that the employee isn't there at the time. But then we can also discount certain times of day when we know that Windows Update will be running to download updates and install them on the computer. So for those times of day, we would not raise an alarm. And this is all business intelligence. We know how our equipment is being used, by who, at what time of day, and we're using that to build a detailed graph that shows us the information we need and can even raise alarms when things go out of bound. So custom reports can send high-level summaries to non-technical users as well. And this is one of the reasons for having a custom report rather than a built-in report. The built-in reports tend to be technical, use technical jargon, and use abbreviations to make the output condensed, which is great for the system administrators. But it's very difficult for non-technical users to consume because they don't understand the jargon, they don't understand the abbreviations, they won't appreciate what an IP address and subnet mask really means. They may not even understand the syntax in which it's written, but they certainly won't know that some range corresponds perhaps to the accounts department in the company. So the advantage then of a custom report is that we can do some decoding of the technical jargon into what this means for a non-technical user. And then we can, rather than send the report to the network administrator, we can send it directly to the non-technical user. And of course, especially if we combine this with scheduling, we can have the equipment send this report to the non-technical user at the same time, every day, without any involvement from the network management team at all. So this can be extremely valuable. And for instance, for software developers who've deployed a particular service and want to know how many network packets per second are going through a particular server, and they're working on a project to try and improve the bandwidth efficiency of a particular server program that we're hosting, maybe in our software as a service model in the cloud. So the developers want to know how many packets per second have gone through the Ethernet switches. The network management team can set up a custom report that generates exactly that number, considering only the ports that are of interest, and can send that at whatever granularity of time is required to the development team, who can use that number. Some of the reports they might ignore completely because they're not trying a new version at the time. Other reports they can look at in great detail and think, right, we upgraded the server at this time from this version to that version, and that included this particular new enhancement that we developed, but did not include that other enhancement. How has that changed the number of packets per second? So they can see the effectiveness of this particular update, and they can think, right, okay, that was a good one. You know, that's improved it by 8%. And then another report will tell them about another enhancement to the software they've rolled out, and so this goes on. And none of this with any involvement from the network administration team. So this is not adding to the workload of the network administration team, which means we're getting information out of our switches to enable our company to be more data-driven, do a better job, be more efficient and effective, and we're not adding to the running cost of our company because it's the equipment that's producing this automatically. If we combine this concept of custom reports with scheduling, which I will discuss in another lecture. These custom reports could also be saved as a web page onto the intranet system, and that can be quite useful if there's going to be a first page of summarized information with hyperlinks. Of course, the advantage of a web page, we can have hyperlinks in it, and we can click on those hyperlinks to get more detailed information. So for this example, we said we might have the number of packets per second from each of our servers. We can click on any particular server and get a breakdown, perhaps into the maybe a minute by minute breakdown for the 60 minutes of the last hour. And then we can click on any of those and see a breakdown by all the different protocols that are being used. Sometimes this data might have been pre-prepared as part of the custom report. On other occasions, actually clicking on the link might trigger the report to run. And so now the users can actually ask for reports to be run, rather than having the system schedule lots of complicated reports that might take time and resource to execute. We're now producing the summary, but only digging in and producing detailed reports if a user specifically asks. And again, all this is set up as a custom report without any input from the network management team, so it's very effective and efficient for the company to make this information available if and when it's needed. And we can have this decode of information by referring to other databases. So for example, rather than having a custom report that says the amount of network traffic that's gone through this switch or router corresponding to the IP subnet 192.168.2.0/24 is this many thousand packets, we can decode that subnet to the name Accounts Department. And all of a sudden, that becomes much more meaningful to a non-technical user. So this is an example of using data from an external source to get rid of jargon, get rid of technical detail that a user wouldn't understand, and replace it with something that the user will understand. Some real-world, meaningful terminology rather than the technical detail of a particular IP subnet. And we can also customize the output format. I mentioned already that we could generate an ASCII file, that we might generate an email or a PDF. We could also generate tweets or any other output format we like. So we're not really restricted here by the fact that we're using custom report technology. Now let's look at an example. This slide here shows a daily summary email about a TELS management software that is a custom report. This is a custom report generated by their network management system, their NMS, and it's intended for semi-technical consumption. So it says, this email draws your attention to faults with electronic equipment. Visit this particular website for advice about fixing any faults that might be in your network. Then the situation report, as at particular time. We've got 2 internet connections, they're both working. We've got a variety of access points in this system, and one of them, access point 1, is currently turned off with the following consequences. Look up in a database. What does this access point serve? Database says this device is providing wireless access in the communications basement for staff use only. And the location of the device, and then here's some information on how you might go about fixing this problem. And also, this hotel has got some public workstations for guests to use, and Business Center Computer 2 is currently turned off. Click here to send a wake on LAN message to wake it up and bring that computer into use. So this is of course very custom to what the hotel wants to do, and it's very high level. It's not telling us exactly what problem this access point has suffered. It's not telling us when this particular computer was shut down. It's just telling us this is the state of affairs, and here's some more information. Here's a clickable link. Click on this if you want to do something about it, or you want more advice, or indeed you want to actually diagnose it online, get the system to diagnose something for you. Click here to trigger that action. So this example shows the custom report, and in this particular example it's also scheduled, and that's why it's run at exactly 6 p.m. So in this lecture about custom reports, we've considered what are custom reports in the first place, and how can we define them, either as a script that we would put onto an embedded device, or as a more complete program that we might run on our network management system, integrating data from a particular device, from many particular devices, integrating data from databases as well, bringing a lot of resources to bear to produce reports in a very customized, summarized format, possibly for technical use, possibly for non-technical use, and we've seen how we might schedule these as well, which I'll go into more detail about in another lecture. And then finally we looked at an example of a custom report intended for semi-technical consumption from an hotel's management system. So that brings us to the end of this lecture. That's Custom Reports, Part 2, Section 5, Topic 4 of the lecture course.